Today's podcast, and first off, thank you for following along on the Cochise County Travels podcast. I appreciate everybody a bunch. But today's podcast came about through an article in True West Magazine, as well as mutual friends at the BTK Coalition. Today we have Amy Gauthier on the phone. She is the new owner of the Ellis store in Lincoln, New Mexico. Welcome, Amy.
Thanks, Mike. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Is it the Ellis store or the Ellis House?
Well, it's the Ellis House now. It was the Ellis store.
Okay. So you have a pretty cool story. I read about you on multiple websites and articles that basically you were driving from Louisiana to Utah, and your GPS, for some reason, rerouted you. It could be a road closure, an accident, whatever reason, rerouted you, and you ended up in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. Tell us about that.
I did. It was during the pandemic, and I had driven home to see my sister for Mother's Day. And driving back to Utah, like you said, I got rerouted, and I started seeing this road signage for Billy the Kid's grave, Fort Sumner. And I was like, Billy the Kid? And yeah, long story short, I needed to make a pit stop and break the trip up. So I stopped and I followed the signage and I went to the cemetery, and I just remember being really confused. You know, what was Fort Sumner? I was a little underimpressed with the cemetery, and I was like, Billy the Kid is buried here? I didn't get it. So I got back in the car and continued on my way home, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so that's really when my Billy the Kid interest started. Like a lot of people I know, something happened during the pandemic. If you ask James Townsend, he'll tell you the same thing.
But you didn't just stop there, right? Like you got to see your family in Utah. You probably got back. Did you stay in Utah or did you go back to Louisiana?
No, I stayed in Utah. So I was from Louisiana originally, but I was living in Utah at the time.
Gotcha. So when you got to Utah and you got back home then, and I'm sure like all of us, it's stuck in your head. Did you begin this research process about Billy the Kid? How did he end up at Fort Sumner? What's going on? Tell us about that.
Definitely. Yeah, so I was thinking about it, and the next stop that I made on that road trip, I was like, well, I need an audiobook or something. So I make a stop, I pull up my Audible, and I actually downloaded Mark Lee Gardner's book because it was just the first one that popped up on the list when I typed in Billy the Kid. So the rest of the drive home, I was listening to Hell on a Fast Horse, and that was the first book that I ever read about Billy the Kid. And it just went from there. I just couldn't read enough. I couldn't find enough YouTube videos, enough podcasts. Yeah, it was just kind of an obsession.
But did it continue? Like, did it? Yeah. It continued to the point because somewhere along the line you ended up in Lincoln. Tell us about how you ended up back in Lincoln. Like, were you up in Utah and then you're like, I can't get this out of my head. I've got to see this place called Lincoln. How did that end up?
Yeah, well, I just did it. I mean, you read enough and you read enough and you read enough about all these places, and then you want to see these places. So I read and researched, and then I decided to put this road trip together to come this way and see all these things. And then I saw the things, and then I went home and I read more and learned more, and then I wanted to see more things. And so anytime I could get away, basically I was coming here to, see things and see sights. And, I'd met some people here, so I was coming to see people here. And it was really, And then I saw the Ellis House for the first time in February or March of 2023. I came in town to meet a friend who knew the person who was the caretaker of the property at the time. And he was like, do you want to see the inside of the Ellis store? And I was like, yeah, I sure do. And I remember driving over that night from, I was staying at the Cedar Wall place in Capitan. And so I came here, and when I walked in, I was like, well, this is my house.
Yeah, but it couldn't. So you walked in and literally said, this is your house. Did you know it was for sale then?
It wasn't for sale then. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know who owned it. I didn't know why the person that did own it wasn't living here. Why was there a caretaker here? What was happening? I mean, nothing was really happening. I just walked in and I thought, well, this is my house. One day I'm going to have to knock on this guy's door and tell him I need to buy your house, and that was February of last year. So by the time we were in town for Lincoln Days, the beginning of August that summer, there was a for sale sign out front. And that's how it all started.
But when that for sale sign showed up, were you in the research phase of the Ellis House? Like, obviously you got there and you're like, well, this is meant to be. This is my house. This is my place. This has got my name on it. You people are all living here. Hey, get out of my house. And did you start a research about it? Like, before you saw the sign, were you reading books and doing that? Did it shift from Billy the Kid to the Ellis House?
Yeah, it kind of did. It did. Well, I was really curious because this house is very old and there's a lot of history here, and there's not a lot of. I mean, you're hard pressed to find a book about Lincoln County War or Billy the Kid that doesn't mention Isaac Ellis or this house. But it's really sparse. It's little bits and pieces of stories and history and information. But there's not, who was Isaac Ellis? I mean, he was, a farmer, and he came from Colfax County with his family whenever the Colfax County War was going on. And he left one war zone and literally moved to another. And yeah, so I was doing as much research about the house and the people that had been here before as much as I could. Yeah.
So I'm going to read something about the Ellis House, just in case people are like, what is the Ellis House? And,
okay.
And you've been listening to enough podcasts to know that if I make a mistake, the person I'm interviewing always corrects me. And
okay.
So if I make a mistake, I hope you correct me. I will not be upset at all, ever.
Okay.
That's how people learn. The Ellis storehouse was built around 1850 by Isaac Ellis and his family. They opened the store in 1876, not only as a boarding house, but as ranch headquarters. Around 1905, it was turned into a tuberculosis sanitarium, but as we know it today, it really gained its importance during the Lincoln County War. The Lincoln County War pitted two groups against each other, one led by Lawrence Murphy and Jimmy Dolan, and the other by John Tunstall and Alexander McSween. During the 5-day battle, the Ellis store was a stronghold for many of the regulators. Correct?
Yeah, that's about correct. So there's a little bit of misinformation with the chronology. So the house was built in the 1850s, but it was not built by Isaac Ellis. It was built by a Spanish settler named Sabino Gonzalez.
Gotcha.
And it was, interestingly, it was one of the first adobe structures in the valley. So the Torreon was the first thing that was built here. And there were just little jacals and little tents and settlements all over the area. But this was one of the first adobe structures that was here. And it was just a two-room structure. And that was, so let's say mid 1850s. in 1871, Elijah Dow filed a claim on all of the land on the eastern side of Lincoln when the U.S. Land Office opened. So he bought the house from Gonzalez, had all of this land, left it to either his son or his brother, Daniel. And Daniel is who sold it to Isaac Ellis. July 25th, 1874.
Okay.
And it was about 120 acres at the time. And I think he paid like $2,700 for it, if I remember correctly. So that's how Isaac came to be here.
And so, but it did really become important. Significance. It was during that time, the 1850s, but during and trust me, I am well read on Wyatt Earp. I am not well read on Billy the Kid. It's taking me a while to get there because I've got so much other stuff I'm reading about and researching for future podcasts. But the store really became important during the Lincoln County Wars, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So when he bought the place, they started adding on to it. The front of the house, which I guess is actually the south side of the house, they built boarding house rooms along the front, and they would house people that were coming in town for court sessions and things like that. He opened the mercantile store, and I found an advertisement for the Ellis store in a publication. And so he had clothing, he had farm implements, he had all kinds of dry goods and like carpets and boots and just stuff like that. But it was a stronghold during the 5-day battle of the Lincoln County War. But the world is really small here, and I think it was even smaller then. But Isaac was involved with all of these people, the regulators, Tunstall, McSween. They were all friends, and he was just involved in everything that went on here. So there were always people coming in and out of here for all kinds of things. And then when the 5-day battle happened, Charlie Bowdry was here, John Middleton